Looks like it's time to begin this morning. We want to welcome all of you here this morning. Also want to welcome Dan Chase here, who is the Leadership Development Coordinator for Department of Human Resource Management. He lives in Riverton with his wife Annie and his two sons Dallas and Eric. We want to welcome you here, and I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit more about himself as he goes through this discussion on emotional intelligence at work. I'm going to be handing out the attendance rosters. We'll start at the back, and as they come up to the front, the last person who gets the attendance roster, if at the end of the session you'll just bring them up to the table here, and then we'll collect them later. Any questions before we begin? Okay, turn it over to you, Dan.
Thanks. Can you all hear me okay? Thanks for the introduction. As she said, my name is Dan Chase. I'm originally from Laie, Hawaii, and I've lived in Utah now for about 11 years or so. Before we jump into anything, why don't we go ahead and do a straw poll really quickly. How many of you, just by show of hands, have some exposure or some familiarity with the concept of emotional intelligence? Okay. And how many of you, show of hands, came in here because it's near the end of the line and you looked, you didn't like anything, you're like, well, I might as well go in there? Very candid. I appreciate that. Very honest. Okay. Well, what we're going to spend part of our time doing is talking about what emotional intelligence is, and then why it matters. And you'll notice the title for our presentation here is The Leadership It Factor, and I suppose that requires some explanation as well. I suspect you've had the same experience that I have, that there have been times in your life where that you have worked for someone, or you have worked around or just been around someone who had, for lack of a better descriptor, that it. They had that something, and you looked at them and you said, that's a leader. And if your experience is anything like mine, they didn't necessarily have the most technical competence. They didn't necessarily have the most education. And it was something else. And for much of my life and all of my adult life, I didn't know what that was until I came across this concept of emotional intelligence. And when I read it, it was sort of like a light went off, and I thought, that's it. That is what I think is that it factor, that je ne sais quoi, that indefinable or undefinable quality that gives someone that leadership capacity. Now, we're going to define this, but I want to say something for the sake of full disclosure. Emotional intelligence, there is lots that you can read about it, but it's pretty hotly debated, at least in academic circles, about its validity, simply because it is so broadly defined. Does that make sense? There are a lot of people who say, well, you're describing everything, and therefore you are identifying nothing, right? And so now my experience has been, and I think, I suspect you'll find the same thing as we talk about it, that it will resonate with you, and that's certainly the experience that I've had. Let me just give you one quick example of what I think emotional intelligence is. Now this story is well known, and maybe apocryphal, but there are many who say, no, this happened in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, right? 1858, Lincoln and Douglas had 7 debates for a Senate seat across Illinois in all these different places. And just like it is today, in 1858, one of the biggest, if you want to nail someone politically, if you want to get a label on them that is going to ruin them, today the term we use is flip-flopper, right? If you can peg someone with the flip-flopper label, that's hard to shake. Oh yeah, they're just telling you what you want to hear, but this is their real position. Well, in 1858, Southern Illinois was much more slave-holding sympathetic than Northern Illinois, and so Stephen Douglas, in one debate, said Lincoln is two-faced. He's telling the people of Northern Illinois different things than he's telling the people of Southern Illinois. He's two-faced. And Lincoln was how tall? 6'4", which, by the way, at the time was giant. Okay, I mean, giant, he had these long arms, and he was just homely, that kind of thing. So think about this for a second. He's there in person, and Stephen Douglas says Lincoln is two-faced, hurls this political insult at him. And instead of getting riled up, instead of getting really angry and being hijacked by his emotions, Lincoln absorbs this insult. Okay, and waits for his turn, because it was like an hour, hour and a half, hour. That's how they did the debates back then. Very different from our 30-second soundbite debates of today. Lincoln absorbs this insult and gets up very calmly and says, my opponent, didn't call him by name, says, my opponent has called me two-faced. And he said, I leave it to you, he said to the group there listening. I leave it to you. If I had another face, do you think I would come out in public with this one? And how did the audience respond? They loved it. They loved it, right? And that's part of Lincoln's charm, is that, whoa, this guy, it's sort of in some ways emotional or verbal judo. It was this massive insult that he got and then said, I'm going to use it. Okay? It's very similar. Any Ronald Reagan fans in here? When Reagan was running against Mondale in '84, what was the big concern about Reagan? His age. And he, in one of the debates, he said, I will not let my opponent's youth and inexperience, I will not use that against him. And of course, everyone, including Mondale, was just cracking up. Okay? Really impressive. In fact, I apologize. Let me give you one more Reagan example. Okay? And if anybody in here just despises Reagan, I apologize. Although you'll like this because it's about Reagan getting shot. So Reagan it's 81, I believe, right? Reagan is shot by Hinckley. Was his last name, right? There's an assassination attempt. And Reagan is being rushed into surgery. And he has the wherewithal and the presence and the sense of humor, maybe, and I would say emotional intelligence. Do you know what he said to the surgeons as he's being wheeled in? He said, I hope you guys are Republicans. Okay? Then, same thing. So what happens? What happens to a president very often when there's some kind of crisis like this? Do you know what happens? It unifies the country, and Reagan's numbers shot up. Because his poll numbers were so good because of this assassination attempt. Now, actually, a Utah guy was his primary pollster. Okay? Very high in Reagan's cadre there, okay? Richard Worthland was his name. And after the assassination attempt, Reagan's numbers, enough time had passed and Reagan's numbers were really dipping. Okay, that sort of euphoria, that unifying effect was wearing off. And Richard Worthland, Dick Worthland, he was called, didn't want to go in and tell his bosses, like, you're tanking. The public, you're losing their support, okay? You're not seen as that favorable. So he goes in, musters his courage, goes in and says, Mr. President, I hate to tell you this, but it's been X amount of months since the assassination attempt. You're doing well, and your numbers are plummeting. And he could tell that Dick Worthland was visibly nervous and uncomfortable telling the president this. And he said, Dick, don't worry. I'll just go out and get shot again. Okay? I mean, this is the kind of thing. Now, these are all examples that involve sense of humor, and emotional intelligence doesn't necessarily have to involve sense of humor, but I think it involves something else. It's when this sense of humor is being applied, right? When you think of Lincoln absorbing this political insult, instead of getting angry, having enough emotional control to say, I'm going to use this. Or Reagan being self-deprecating enough or in control enough to say, yeah, okay, maybe our numbers are plummeting, but we'll be okay. We'll be okay. And this is partly why it's the leadership it factor, okay? Because in moments of emotional distress, and that doesn't have to be an assassination attempt, it doesn't have to be a Senate debate, it can be anything. Your people experience emotional distress at work. We look to the people that are in control. That have enough emotional intelligence to say, okay, I understand that budgets are being cut, or the legislature's doing this, or this happened with the contract, or this is going on with the news, or whatever. We're going to be okay. and I'm going to tell you how. Okay? That's the kind of thing that we look for. It's if I were to say Captain Sully, who am I talking about? The airline pilot. You remember this story? Was it Canadian Geese, I think, that flew into the engines, and he's been praised. He was sort of a national hero for a while because all he said is prepare for landing. You know, he was very calm, and he handled it perfectly. He landed the plane perfectly. But then do you know what he did in terms of leadership behavior? He was the last one off the plane. And before he got off, he walked up and down the aisle making sure everybody had gotten off and that everybody was okay. Right? That's leadership. I think that's emotional intelligence. So let me get more specific here about what we're going to be talking about specifically. Self-awareness, and we'll get into these into more detail, okay? Self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and social skills. And you're going to see that these things are not separate categories. These things are not unrelated. Now, I should tell you that emotional intelligence, this idea, was popularized by Daniel Goleman. He published a book, wrote a book in 1995 called, it's a very clever title, called Emotional Intelligence, okay? What I would recommend to you is a second book he wrote called Working with Emotional Intelligence. And he talks specifically about how emotional intelligence applies in the workplace, in organizations, in leadership positions, okay? Really interesting, really engaging read. But we're also going to be using the research of a couple of guys named Caruso and Salovey, who really early on were pioneers in the field of emotional intelligence. And basically, if we were to sort of pare it down to its most basic concept here, it's the idea that for decades, we would gauge someone's potential for success and leadership capacity based on intellect. Purely intellect, gauged by what? IQ test. Okay? Those kinds of things. And yet, that was clearly, as we talked about in our first example, if your experience is anything like mine, that is insufficient. Sure, it matters. Sure, that probably helps. But the reason that we've got a star as our symbol here is all things being equal. Let's say Jim and I here, by the way, I said Jim and I, not Gemini, okay? Jim and I here have the same education, have the same certifications, have the same technical background. It is the person who demonstrates, who possesses and demonstrates emotional intelligence, evidence tells us, that is the person that is likely to be promoted, and the person that is most likely to be in a position, whether formally being promoted or even informally, to exert influence and leadership. It is much more likely that if Jim's got emotional intelligence and I don't, despite the fact that again, maybe we've been at UDOT the same amount of time. We've got the same certification, same education, all that kind of stuff. Or maybe I even have more of it. Jim is the one that is more likely to have followers. Okay? And by definition, as weird as that term sounds to us, by definition, a leader has what? Followers. Okay? Followers as opposed to employees. People that are willing to give discretionary effort, not just do the bare minimum. Okay? People who are committed to the organization, committed to the team, right? Because of these things here. Okay? A couple other definitions here from Emily Starrett. Emotional intelligence refers to the array of personal management and social skills that allows one to succeed in the workplace and life in general. I think we've talked about that. And then leadership, and we're not surprised to see this from Goleman in that book that I just mentioned, but leadership is almost all emotional intelligence. Leadership is almost all emotional intelligence. So let's get into what this is exactly, okay? Some concepts that we want to think about. Emotions are not unanalyzable primaries, but are the consequences of ideas stored in the subconscious, okay? So it's not just this thing that we cannot control. You've heard maybe your kids, or you've heard people with impulse control problems say, well, I can't help it. You made me angry. Okay, you made me angry, and the truth of the matter is what? Yeah, no one can make you angry. By the way, I do not recommend bringing up this concept to your wife when she tells you you're making me mad. Okay? And it's not, I have learned through sad experience not to say, well, actually, honey, I can't make you mad because that's not the time, okay? But it's good for us to know. It's good for us to know, right? Emotions seem automatic, but they can be changed by changing the inputs. So I'm going to show you a sort of how emotions come about here in a second. But this only matters, our discussion here today only matters if you and I are convinced that, yes, there is something I can do about my emotions. And I don't want to imply for a second here that emotions are bad, right? They're not bad. What we want to avoid, emotions serve a purpose. They serve an evolutionary purpose. What we want to avoid is being hijacked or having emotions come out or surface or explode at non-beneficial times. Does that make sense? We want to decide how they are expressed. We want to decide how they contribute to how we're thinking or how we're acting, right? And that's difficult to do. Most of us have learned to do this to some extent, but prisons and other places are similar to that, are filled with people who never really developed this skill. It's that lack of impulse control, right? Children have an underdeveloped emotional responses to things. They can't control it, right? They can't engage or disengage from their emotions as the situation requires. And I suspect you are all successful and healthy and happy adults, and so you've learned to do this. What we want to do is learn to do it as it applies to our current leadership opportunities, right? So the other thing I want to say is there's not a conflict between reason and emotion. For so long in organizations, people would say, well, look, this is a place of business. Act professionally. There should be no emotions here in the workplace, especially if it tends to be a hyper-masculine environment. Oh, there's no emotions. And that's just nonsense. If you have people, emotions are involved. Okay, people are feeling things. And there isn't this conflict between emotion and reason. Okay? And in fact, what we learn and what we'll see here in a second is that reason and emotion work together. In fact, let me just talk about this now. Who's Phineas Gage? Does that name sound familiar? Yeah, exactly. 1848, okay? Phineas Gage is in Vermont working on a railroad. There's an explosion, a 3-foot railroad spike gets shot through his head. Okay, here's a picture. No, it's a joke, okay? But he survived. He actually survived, and he was actually like, the funny thing about it is, if you read histories about it, people talk about, despite that, he was still like a really good-looking dude. Like, they're like, yeah, look at this, good for him, you know, that kind of a thing. But he's well known because the cognitive part of his brain was not impacted. Okay? Memory, cognitive function, all this stuff was good. And so everyone's like, oh, good, he's great. But he still ended up living a relatively short life because what was impacted was the emotional part of his brain. And so his decisions increasingly became more and more irrational because he didn't have the emotional part of his brain working with the cognitive side to help him make rational decisions. Does that make sense? So it's in a lot of ways, it's a false dichotomy that we've created. We need emotions to help us be rational. You'll see some quotes on that here in a second, okay? Emotions do not compel action. Everyone has the power to make choices in the face of emotional responses, even if the choice is taking no action. Okay? Please. We'll get to that, okay? That's the flow that we talked about, okay? We'll get to that. Let me make one more point. This is the quote that I was just talking about. This is out of a textbook that I teach out of. Judge and Robin says, we must have the ability to experience emotions to be rational. Right there, just that first sentence is, for a lot of people, is like, what? Because again, they see them as emotions infringing on our rationality, okay? Why? Because our emotions provide important information about how we understand the world around us. And by the way, we don't have to just rely on Phineas Gage. That's just sort of the interesting, how this scientist started thinking about this. Neuroscience has replicated this over and over again, okay? So, what are emotions? Emotions are the form in which one experiences automatic, subconscious value judgments. Now, to your question, I want you to remember this concept of value judgment. So, what are these things, right? They are automatic, and generally speaking, they're subconscious. Unless we bring them to our consciousness, they're just going to happen. And if they're just happening with our subconscious, we're not in a position to what? To manage them, to engage and disengage from them as it helps our leadership. Okay, so here's your question. So let's take our flow here. This is how we feel emotions, and we could add another arrow and subject here, which would be action, right? But let's say, any hunters in here? Okay, so let's say you're out hunting, and this object can be anything. Right? This can be anything. So let's say, tell me your name again. I'm sorry. John. Okay? John is out and he sees a massive bear. Okay? Cognitively, what's his brain going to tell him? This thing can really hurt me. Okay? This can really hurt me. This can do damage. Maybe John's like, well, I'm a big dude. I could take the bear. And his friends and say, no, you can't. Okay? And maybe he sees the bear. Maybe it's a mother bear with some cubs. Okay? And he's really kind of terrified. Now, think about this. What else his cognition is doing, the cognitive side of his brain. Let's say John sees the same bear in the zoo. Is that a problem? No, because his brain is processing context. He's like, why did I go hunting alone? Why did I just bring this .22? That's not going to do anything. What is happening here, right? Cognition's going to take... Then there's a value appraisal. Remember that, the value judgment? Then there's a value appraisal. What is he thinking about? What's on the line here? What does he value? His life, in this case, right? And then that leads to the emotion. The emotion most likely, I assume here for John, is fear, okay? Real fear. Now, we're going to see this here in a second, but generally speaking, do you know what happens consciously? What two get taken out? Cognition, value appraisal. What happens? He sees the bear. He feels what? Fear. Okay, these are the inputs that we can change. Okay, this is where this is where we can halt things, so to speak. But only if we're conscious that this is the process, right? If we're not aware of it and this stuff is happening in our subconscious, it's just now think about this in ways that might impact you. Tell me your name. Ryan. Okay, Ryan is an employee of mine. That's not true, by the way. But let's say Ryan is an employee of mine. And he's really been kind of borderline insubordinate for like a month now. He's really been, I've seen him like confront me in team meetings and really try and make me lose credibility in front of the other employees, okay? So now my cognition tells me, no, this has been going on for a month. This is not cool, okay? I don't like this. He's my employee. I'm his boss. This is borderline insubordinate. This shouldn't be happening. I make a value appraisal. What are the value appraisals or value judgments that I might be going on here? Oh, do I need him? Okay. I care about credibility. Okay. I don't like this. I don't like that he's hurting. This matters. My standing with the rest of the staff matters. Okay. And I don't like the way this is making me feel. I don't like the fact that I'm his boss and he's doing this. He's feeling that he's in a position where he can do this. My power is feeling threatened, right? That kind of a thing. And so maybe then I feel an emotion. Give me a possible emotion. Anger. Now, how many of you, and by the way, it's not to say that the anger isn't right. This is not to say, well, good, you've gone through this process so you can change either the value appraisal or how you think about it. so that your emotion isn't angry. What it does is it gives you the opportunity to modify. Is Ryan's behavior okay? No. So what changes? Your perception and the way you approach him. Maybe he needs anger, okay? But maybe he doesn't, right? Maybe it needs to be softened, but you can only control that if you're aware of this process. Does that make sense? Okay, we'll get more into that. So the first thing, and I want you to think about this, object, something, our senses pick up something, cognition, how we think about it, value appraisal, and then emotion, okay? I want you to think about that as we talk about all these things. So we're going to talk about self-awareness here. Self-awareness is first emotional awareness. It's understanding, it's you and I increasing our emotional antennas. Now, most of us don't take the time to stop and think and say, how am I feeling right now? Well, my peer in our meeting with Carlos really was rude about my idea and shot it down, right? Most of us don't take the time to go, how does that make me feel? I mean, we just don't do that, right? But part of becoming more effective at this is actually saying, wait, okay, what's actually going on here? What's happening to me, right? And being able to label our emotions, increasing our emotional vocabulary, okay? Look at this, attuning. This is from a book called Primal Leadership, also very good. I would recommend it to you as well. Attuning to our feelings according to neurological research helps us find the meaning in data, and so leads to better decisions. Think about that. That's a massive part of leadership, is decision making. And so attuning to our feelings according to neurological research helps us, right? Think Phineas Gage, to make better decisions. Our emotional memory banks thus enable us to judge information efficiently. So it's very useful for you and I to know, oh man, okay, I've got a performance appraisal meeting with Ryan. How has this gone in the past? Okay, how am I likely to feel? He and I always just fight. Or he's never happy. He always thinks he's way better and makes more contributions than he does. Okay? There is value in being aware, okay, I'm starting to feel a little anxious about this, or I'm starting to get afraid or I'm starting to get angry or upset or, frustrated, whatever it is, right? There's value in having that emotional awareness. And by the way, the reason this is so important is because unless we are aware, unless we have self-awareness, none of the other things that we talk about matter. Does that make sense? Unless you are aware of your emotions, think back to our flow there, there's nothing you can do about it. Okay? And yet again, most of us just don't really have good emotional antennas, certainly not for ourselves anyway. What about an accurate self-assessment? What does this mean? What does it mean to have an accurate self-assessment? Okay, how do others perceive you? Good. Okay, that's exactly right. And it's knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. Being aware of that, okay? It's knowing, and how do you know that? How do you know what your strengths and weaknesses are? How does one decide that or discover that in life? It's most of us can be self-reflective and think about, you know what, I know I can't dance, okay? I didn't have to take an internet test to tell me that I can't dance, okay? But yeah, most of us have experience with that. How else, though? How else could we increase or gain a better self-assessment? Okay, good. Feedback. Feedback from others, right? And leaders solicit feedback. They want it. Let me give you a little plug here, state employees anyway. We have a free feedback assessment for supervisors. Okay, it's called the CLIP assessment. It's on the Employee Gateway. It is free. Take advantage of it. The CLIP assessment just stands for Communications, Leadership, Interpersonal Effectiveness, and Performance Management. Okay, it's just 4 broad supervisory categories, right? So on the Employee Gateway, it's free. Okay, but there are also a million other things out there that are free too. Online, other things, other 360-degree instruments that I think UDOT has employed in the past. Lots of ways. Okay. Lots of ways to increase your self-awareness and to gain an accurate self-assessment. And then somewhat counterintuitively, we have here in the self-awareness category is self-confidence. And a lot of people think that's kind of strange because partly when you're getting an accurate self-assessment, you're learning the bad with the good, right? And the reason self-confidence is here is because real self-confidence, not hubris, not arrogance, not feigned confidence, is rooted in reality. It's certainty in knowing what you're good at, what your limitations might be, and so putting yourself in positions that allow you to exploit, for lack of a better word, your strengths and weaknesses, your comfort zones, things like that. Does that make sense? And so real self-confidence, it requires an accurate self-assessment. Not this false sense of, oh, I'm good at everything, and my personality is perfect, and everyone gets along with me, and that kind of a thing, okay? And then from Socrates here, we'll be relying on the Greeks quite a bit here. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's a very human and exclusively human thing to sort of be that self-reflective and introspective and say, oh, what am I like? What am I doing? What is my personality? Do I sometimes lose it with employees? Are there times when I need to be more confrontational with employees, but I'm way too intimidated? When I'm way too scared? That kind of a thing, okay? Now, here's what we're going to do, really quickly. I'm going to show you, and if you've ever had training from me before, you've done this exercise before. But I want you to think of this process, right? This object, cognition, value appraisal, and then emotion. The emotion that it elicits, right? Because we want to be aware that this is happening, not just object emotion. I see the bear, I'm afraid. But there are steps. There are intermediate steps along the way. So I'm going to show you, I think, 5 images. And I want you to just think about, you can write it down if you have something to write down. I want you to think about the emotions that are your knee-jerk emotions that are being elicited as you see these images. Okay? And then think about, well, why? What you see the object, but then what is the cognition and the value appraisal that's happening, okay? And this is the only one I'm going to talk through. Cognitively, we know this is what? 9/11, okay? Value appraisal, okay? This impacts our national identity, our sense of security, our sense of safety, right? Lots of things, okay? Our sense of justice, fairness. Anybody, just out of curiosity, anybody have an emotional reaction, even slight, to this image? What emotion would you say you're feeling as you see it? Disbelief, okay? Yeah, sadness I think is a really good one, a really common one, okay? A few other images here. Think about what your knee-jerk emotional response is. Do you know what image this is? Very local, right? National news story, but very local to us. Okay, now again, the reason we do that is not only because you and I need to become more effective in increasing our emotional antenna and actually having moments where we say, okay, how am I feeling about this? Instead of keeping it so subconscious, but thinking about that process. Object, cognition, value appraisal, emotion. And what we remember, the variables, the inputs that we can change are that cognition and value appraisal. Okay? All right, so let's, for time's sake, let's move on. Let's talk about self-management. I suspect, this is difficult for me to talk about. It's also, when I go to groups across the state and other places and talk about this, it's difficult because, like I said earlier, I suspect you have a lot of self-control already. You have to be a functioning adult. you don't want to do the dishes, and you do it anyway. You sure as heck on Monday don't want to show up to work, and you do anyway, right? That's self-management. Okay, that's self-control. In fact, I thought about this. Any RSL fans here? We're not huge soccer people in my family, but last summer, my wife and I decided, they had like a really cheap day or something. It was in August, and we said, hey, let's take our then 2, almost 3-year-old to the soccer game. So we go to the game. It's hot. It's the afternoon. It's August, and we don't last, till halftime. And we're leaving, and we're walking away, and I don't know where it is at Rio Tinto, but there was a big grass hill. And now when you walk down a hill, what do you do with your body? How do you walk? You adjust, right? Because it requires different muscles, and so you adjust. And me and my wife were doing this, and because we're really, really good parents, we didn't realize that maybe our 2-year-old doesn't know to do that with the big hill, and he just goes tumbling down, okay? By the way, I wouldn't share this if this was like a human services or Child and Family Services conference. I'm not sure that I would share the story, but I think it's safe at UDOT. But he goes tumbling down the hill because he hadn't developed those muscles, right? Hadn't learned to do that, and yet you have. You have this to some extent. The idea is that we want to get even better at it. And self-management does not happen without self-awareness, okay? So here's what we mean. We mean self-control. We mean being able to be in a situation and say, I want to tell my boss off so bad right now. And I could do it and win the argument so easily. And yet we bite our tongue. Why? Why is it very likely to be beneficial in that situation not to keep your job, okay? To keep a healthy professional role, even if your boss is going to fire you. Politically, it's probably pretty smart that that's not the time and place. It's not going to be productive, okay? Man, I really just want to tell this employee of mine off, okay? They have been slacking. Their work has really been subpar for the past 2 months. They've made everyone's life difficult. They're always whining, always complaining. We bend over backwards for them. And the easiest thing, they've made your life difficult. The easiest thing would be to just explode. But we say, no, that's not going to be productive. That's not going to help my leadership. Or, how many of you, let's do a show of hands here. Maybe your boss is in the room and you don't want to admit this. How many of you ever get to work, you sit down at your desk or wherever it is that you work and you say, I just don't care. I don't want to be here today. I could not care less about getting this stuff done. Yeah, sick leave, right? What's that? Okay, not today though, right? Just other days, right? I mean, we all do. We all have that, right? We all have that. And yet, I suspect most of you, all of you, say, I got to get this stuff done. Okay, I'm going to lose credibility. If my staff sees me going, our jobs suck, okay, that's not going to help them do their jobs or get through the times where they're having those feelings, okay, and therefore it's going to hurt my leadership. I love this from Aristotle. I told you we're going to rely on the Greeks here. Anybody can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. Now, anger we feel so strongly, and it usually elicits an aggressive response, so it's easy to talk about. But I think this is so true. There may be times, I should say, in your jobs where anger is the appropriate emotional response. Anger is not good or bad. There's not good emotions, bad emotions, right? The emotions serve an evolutionary purpose, right? They're there for a reason, even the ones we might label as negative. But I love this because, look, we all get angry. Yeah, that's easy. People can blow up all the time. Yeah, but it's the person who can say, nope, I'm going to be angry, not to the person on the floor. I'm not going to blow up that employee now in front of their peers or in front of a customer. And I need to be angry, but I need to make sure I'm still communicating professionally, okay? And I need to make sure it was actually their fault. Have you ever gotten mad at someone who was the wrong person? And all of a sudden, you've got unnecessary conflict on your hands, and you've lost credibility with that person because you lost your temper. You were emotionally hijacked, right? In fact, Ben Franklin, one of his quotes that I really appreciate is, whatever is begun in anger, usually, not always, whatever is begun in anger usually ends in shame. How many times have you had a blow up or lost it emotionally, and the next day you're like, oh my gosh, I did not handle that well. When that chemical rush is gone and you're sort of, quote unquote, back to your senses, you're like, oh, that was not the way to handle that. Well, the ideal would to not put yourself in that position in the first place, right? To get the appropriate emotional response so that you have credibility, okay? Self-management is relevant to integrity and adaptability because integrity, give me a definition. It's a word we throw out a lot in leadership studies. What does it mean? Anybody? Okay, it's an ethical code. Good. Give me more. Expand on his ethical code. That's good. Doing what's right even when known. Does that require self-control? Self-management? Sure. Yeah, walking the talk. Oh yeah, it's easy for you and I to maybe spout out our mission and vision statement and do the right thing. But when no one's watching, or when we can get away with it, do we have the emotional control, the self-discipline to say, nope, these are my values. I need to try and live in accordance to those values. Right? And it's the leaders that live in accordance to their values, their espoused values, that have what? Respect and credibility. Okay? Respect and credibility. And I would say followers that actually have followers, right? And adaptability is simply, this is kind of counterintuitive to people, but it's the people that are most adaptable, that can handle change the best, are the people that can manage their emotions the best. Does that make sense? I can handle change, and everyone, the evidence says that everyone is distressed over changes in our environment or changes that we don't have control over, especially. And yet it's the people that are like, okay, I can calm myself down, that handle it most effectively. And that's why I like this. Circumstance has no power over you. Your inner weather, it's emotional intelligence. Your inner weather is always and forever at your command. Okay? Let me give you one last example really quickly. Someone shared this with me in training. A reporter was on a plane with Nelson Mandela, okay, South African president, first really a post-apartheid president, generally elected president for South Africa. And he was on a plane, and there was massive problems with this plane. And the reporter wasn't there with, in association with Mandela. He just happened to be on the same plane. It got so bad that it was where the plane was in trouble and the oxygen mask came down, that kind of a thing, right? And he noticed that everyone was freaking out, including himself, and he looked over and Mandela is still just reading his paper. And he had to ask him. They got off the plane, everything was fine, okay? He got off the plane, he asked Mandela, he said, why were you just sitting there reading the paper still? And Mandela said, I know people look to me as a leader. And if they see me freaking out, that's only going to add to the chaos and the fear and the confusion. But if they look to me and I seem to be calm about things, it may help calm them down. That's leadership. That, to me, is that relationship with emotional intelligence and leadership. Because like I said at the very beginning, maybe it's not a plane crashing. Okay? Maybe it's not a bear in the woods. But there are counterproductive emotions that people experience in the workplace, even if it's something as seemingly mundane as going through change, a change in schedule, change in boss, change in budget, whatever else it might be, that is distressing to them. We look to the people who say, hey, we're going to be okay. We're going to be all right, okay? So how do we gain this emotional control? Well, it's introspection, okay? We need to be able to identify and name your emotions. This is really interesting to me, by the way. That the research says it is actually valuable, and I'm trying to do this with my own kids now, if we can increase our emotional vocabulary. There's actual benefit in terms of you and I being able to engage and disengage from our emotions. If you and I, instead of just taking the caveman approach of sad, mad, you know, that kind of thing, if we can actually be more specific and be like, well, you know what, I'm disappointed. You know, I just think I'm feeling anxiety. I think, honestly, I'm frustrated. That there's benefit to being able to have that vocabulary and we can identify and name our emotions. And by the way, with our now 4-year-old, somewhere he's learned the word embarrassing and everything. No, Dallas, you can't have dessert unless you eat your vegetables. Oh, this is so embarrassing. And it's like, why does he sound like a teenage girl? Like, what are we doing to raise him this way? Anyway, he hasn't quite learned yet. We don't have all the vocabulary words down yet, okay? Identify their causes. What is causing these emotions? What is really at the root of things? Maybe it's your value judgment. Maybe maybe I keep getting kicked off at my organization because I keep getting passed over for promotions. Well, maybe I change the cognition and the value appraisal and say, you know what? I need to stop worrying about that. Maybe that is just not for me, and maybe I'll be better off without that promotion. Maybe they're trying to tell me something. Maybe I need to not put my ego or my identity so much on the line here as it relates to that promotion. It's not serving me well because I don't get that promotion, and then I act petty and petulant about it afterwards and kind of pissy, and everyone notices. That's not helping my cause at all. Okay, that's emotional intelligence, right? So change the cause. Object, cognition, values. That's what we can change. Now, again, objects happen to us. Those are difficult to change, but these are the places that we can change things. We've talked about that. And then disengage from sabotaging emotions, like we just talked about. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe I need to stop. Maybe I need to learn that when Joan interrupts me in meetings, she doesn't mean anything by it. I want to blow up at her and tell her off because she's always interrupting. She's always cutting me off in meetings. But maybe I just need to learn that's Joan. Okay? Or maybe when I talk to her, I need to not be so ticked off. I need to change that cognition and that value appraisal. Okay? And then consciously and rationally choose actions. We can only do this if we understand that object, cognition, value appraisal, emotion sequence. Okay? As opposed to bear, fear. Right? By the way, John, if you're hunting and you see that bear, just feel the fear. You don't have to do this, okay? But it's more beneficial if I'm in the meeting or I'm with that employee and they're ticked off or they're insubordinate for 2 months or whatever it is or something, then there's real value in saying, okay, how do I want to handle this? Please.
When you talk about the bear in the woods, I think preparing yourself while you're in the woods beforehand.
Yep. Yep. I think that's excellent. And in fact, we have this experience with, if you're conscientious enough about this, save yourself some difficult conversations with employees by knowing how these conversations are likely to go while still being prepared for curveballs, but knowing how they're likely to respond to things based on your experiences with them in the past. Right? I think there's real value in doing that. Not the least of which, even if you get those curveballs, is that you're starting to combine your emotion and your rationality. Does that make sense? Your cognitive and your emotional side, and I think you're less likely to be emotionally hijacked. I think that's great. Okay? And I told you we're going to talk about Caruso and Salovey, two of the early pioneers on emotional intelligence. It said this ability, this emotional control, does not mean that you never feel emotions or act emotionally, but that your emotions are integrated into your decisions and your behavior in a way that enhances your life and the lives of those around you. So this is what's critical. Emotional management is neither suppressing one's feelings, saying, nope, can't have feelings, this is a workplace, feelings don't exist, nor venting them. That can be really hurtful to your leadership as well if you never manage your emotions. They're always on the surface, okay? Effective emotional management is not a question of whether we should strive to control our feelings, but how we can intelligently engage and disengage from them. Yep, here's a time where I need to use this emotion. I need to use this to fuel me. Nope, here's a time I got to control it a little bit, okay? This is why this matters. This is evidence-based. Okay, there is lots of research that says if you have the manager, the leader that demonstrates this emotional control, this is likely what you're going to see. So if you're effective at this, if you're good at this, emotions focus your attention. You can use your emotions to say, okay, I'm feeling anxiety. Maybe it's time to really hunker down on this report because it's starting to make me really anxious. And you can psych yourself up, oh, I don't want to be at work today, but okay, I'm going to do this. Or calm yourself down or maintain a mood depending on the situation. And just as importantly, from a leadership perspective, you can cheer others up, psych others up, or calm them down, okay, and help them manage their feelings appropriately. An example that's really going to be weird to some of you that I love, though, is Joe Montana. Okay, who's Joe Montana? Quarterback. Okay, some consider him the greatest quarterback of all time. 4 Super Bowls he's won. His nickname, anybody know his nickname? Joe Cool. Because at Notre Dame and then with the Niners, he had this knack for bringing his team back from the brink of defeat. Okay, now Super Bowl 23. Okay, this is the biggest sports stage in America. Super Bowl 23, the 49ers were playing the Cincinnati Bengals, and they had to go like 90 yards, I think, for a game-winning touchdown with like a minute 23 left, minute 20, something like that. It doesn't get more high pressure in someone's professional sports career than this. There's a television timeout. And the offense is on the field during this huddled, on, just kind of standing around there, and the offensive linemen, the skill players were just kind of like, nervous and fidgety because they're like, this is it. If we don't do this now, we lose this Super Bowl, okay? And Joe Montana is kind of sitting down there like this, kind of picking at the grass, and these guys are freaking out, and he goes, hey, guys, check it out. And they go, what? What is Joe talking about? He says, look over there on the sideline. He said, that's John Candy, the actor. And they thought, what is he doing? We're freaking out here, and he's sitting here checking out celebrities with sideline passes. Okay, and what did that do, though? Distracted them, and they said, Joe's not nervous. Joe's got this. We got Joe Cool on our team. And these linemen, these teammates say, it reminded us, we're good. We're going to get this. We got Joe Montana, okay? And this wasn't sort of blustery, kind of rah-rah type of stuff. This was real, sincere, emotional control and self-management. They're like, oh yeah, we're good. And of course, Niners march down the field, and Joe Montana throws the game-winning touchdown. To who? John Taylor. By the way, we all want to say Jerry Rice, but it's John Taylor. Anyway, So I'm not going to go through the not effective stuff because it's just the opposite, okay? If you're not good at it, you don't do these things, okay? But here's the bottom line impact for our leadership and our management. Why does this matter so much? Well, the evidence is that leadership, a lot of it is based on emotion. It's understanding what the values and the needs and the wants and the desires are of followers, and then helping them satisfy and realize those values and needs and desires and wants and that kind of a thing. And that's an emotional process. Also, this idea of emotional contagion, this is very validated. This happens, okay? In fact, really interesting, we learn a lot about emotional contagion from journals of African-American slaves in the antebellum South. Because not only did they have to be aware of their own emotions, if they wanted to thrive or even survive, they had to be aware of whose emotions? Master's emotions, okay? And by the way, we just do this, especially when there are power inequities. It is much more likely that the subordinate is going to be very aware of the emotional state of the superior, okay, of the boss. We just pay attention to that. Now, the emotions are always contagious, but especially in those power dynamics, we can be very clear about which way it's likely to be directed. And we tend to absorb the emotions of power brokers. Okay? And so if you're freaking out about something, or if you're not positive, if you're not trying to create a positive work climate that is happy and good, then that's very likely to be the climate that your employees work in, okay? Then, look at this. The evidence is that when you have a manager that is effective at this self-management, and it requires self-awareness, right? In order to have self-control, self-discipline, self-management, we have to have self-awareness. There is an increase in cooperation amongst team members, okay? More creativity. And then look at these two. Higher motivation and enhanced performance. This is a free source of motivation, increased motivation and enhanced performance, simply based on the emotional intelligence of the leader. Okay, this is significant. This is massive. This matters, especially in situations where we can't just throw money at motivational problems. The evidence is, this is what we see when managers display this. Okay, this matters immensely, right? Okay, before I go into empathy, I want to show you one video really quickly, right? Some of you have seen this before. This is, I think, a massive failing of emotional intelligence, okay, of interpersonal effectiveness, and I think you'll see with me why.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean. But I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's go sporty. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware, Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip, cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
Okay, what was he not picking up on very early on? How offensive he was being? I hope you see that, right? We've got a lot of work to do if you don't see that he was being offensive, okay? But anyway, now the thing is that this happens all the time, and this leads us to what we want to talk about next, which is, and this is an overused term, okay? And so we want to look at it in all its implications and look at it very practically, and that's the idea of empathy. Okay, what do we mean by empathy? Someone very loudly, give us a definition for empathy. Okay, I like that, understanding how the other person feels. So what is different between empathy and sympathy? Good, okay. And sympathy is, we always hear this in the literature, or read this in the literature. It's, I watch the news, I feel sorry for him. Whereas empathy is much deeper than that, and I would say much more demanding than that, to actually try and feel what they're feeling, see things from their perspective, right? So it's understanding others, and generally people who have high empathy have a service orientation. They're like, well, I see other people's plight and how they might be seeing things or feeling, and so I want to help them, right? It's understanding, this is Dale Carnegie, who we'll see more from here in a second, that a person's toothache means more to that person than a famine in China, which kills 1 million people, which sounds like they're real jerks. But it's like, wait, for them in that moment, if you have a toothache, you're not worried about the earthquake or the hurricane. You're like, I've got a toothache, okay? People with empathy tend to appreciate diversity, real diversity, not just cosmetic diversity, not these categories we sort of have created, but real diversity of thought and opinion and experience, okay? We can appreciate those things. And then, this sounds Machiavellian here, but political awareness. The person who actually, this is what we might call hard empathy. Instead of empathy just sort of being the there, I'm sorry your cat died kind of a thing, okay? This is the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes and say, okay, I'm going to this meeting and I'm going to make this proposal. and it's going to require a lot of budget. Why is Steve going to resist? Okay, well, Steve's got an interest in this because of X, Y, and Z, and you know what? I bet Joan, I can get her support because she's on board with any green initiative and, whatever, right? It's just being savvy. It's being smart. It's the ability to put yourself and see, okay, how might they be responding to this? In fact, I bet socially you've had the experience before where you were in at least a group of 3, maybe more. But someone was talking and it was clearly bothering, what they were saying was clearly bothering or offending someone else in the group. And everyone else is picking up on it. And you're just like, shut up. Are you not getting this? Okay, how are you missing this, right? They're not, and Kouzes and Posner, I bet some of you have read Kouzes and Posner. They wrote the Leadership Challenge, there's like 5 editions now. Said the best leaders are and have been those that are the best observers of the human condition. How are people responding to things? The guy in the video we just watched is not picking up on the fact that she's like, before I was born, okay? Or that kind of thing, or, even this idea of, oh, I'm just regular American. That kind of thing. Just not picking up on this, right? This idea that we need to be like, okay, how might they take what I'm saying here, right? It allows you and I to be more effective and to interact with people on an individual basis, to treat them as individual personalities that we know and understand so that we can work with them more effectively, so that we can, as leaders, help our followers realize their values and satisfy their wants and needs. Okay, that's what we're trying to do here. So I want to do a goofy little exercise with you really quickly. I want this side of the room. I'm going to show you a circular image, okay? And we'll see if this even works. I want you to follow with your eyes. You can move your heads if you want, but just follow with your eyes this circular image. Okay, follow the blinking dots around. This side of the room, I want you, there's a black plus sign in the middle of this image. I want you to exclude everything else and only focus on this black plus sign. Does that make sense? Okay. Right side of the room. As you stare exclusively at this black plus sign, what's happening? Okay, and what's happening to the pink dots? Yeah, good answer. They're disappearing. Now you guys, what's happening? Is it just going around in a circle, right, blinking? Now reverse it. You guys, join them. Stare at the black plus sign in the middle, at the exclusion of everything else. See them going away? This is why empathy is so impactful as it relates to communication, because if I'm not willing to go, if you come from a background or whatever in engineering, and I come from a background in something else, in HR, I don't know, something else, and you're like, no, we always just stare at the black plus sign, and you're like, oh, we always follow it around in a dot, unless we're willing to have a dialogue, and see where other people are coming from and put ourselves in their shoes, it's very hard for us to relate. We're almost speaking different languages, or we don't understand. We're like, why does this person always react this way when I give them feedback? Right? There's some real value in emotional intelligence and to our leadership in saying, okay, how might they be seeing things? Let's have a dialogue where it's open enough and I can figure out where they're coming from. Okay? Just a goofy example to demonstrate that. Okay? By the way, I show this all the time just because I know some older women that are like this. This is not empathy, okay? So, the last thing we want to talk about, try and get you out of here a little bit early. So we talked about self-awareness, which is absolutely critical. The other things don't happen without self-awareness. The self-awareness leading to self-management. And we talk about empathy, surveying, seeing where other people are coming from, recognizing that other people have different backgrounds, different personality types, different tendencies, different interests, different values, wants, and needs, okay? Having enough empathy to understand that allows us to have better social skills. So we want to talk about this. People with this emotional intelligence competency are better at building bonds. They understand that, look, you may be from Ecuador and I may be from the United States, but there is something we can build a bond on, okay? There is always something. We may have completely different interests, right? And yet, yeah, you might be a grandmother of 8 and 67 years old, and I may be starting out in my career at UDOT, and I'm 27. There's always common bonds that you can build on, okay? We see these people, this tendency increase their collaboration, cooperation with others. They look for it. And we want to talk a little bit about influence, because that's a massive part of what leadership is, okay? Lincoln, we get a lot of Lincoln here, says, if you are to convert a man to your cause, you must first convince him you are his friend. You convince someone you're their friend by being friendly, by being genuine. This sounds like you're selling them a used car, but I think what Lincoln's getting at is you've got to actually be invested in the person, right? In your employees, the people that you manage. And then I want you to think about this for a second, because this is important. Kouzes and Posner, they wrote The Leadership Challenge, right? Lots of other books, but that's the one they're most well known for. We will work harder and more effectively for people we like. Okay, first of all, do you buy that? My experience is absolutely. We will work harder and more effectively. We will bring more of our whole selves and discretionary effort to work for people we like. And here's the key part. And we like them in direct proportion to how they make us feel. So what I always ask managers is, how do you make your people feel? Do you make them feel like they matter? Do you make them feel like their work contributions are important and valued? Do you make them feel like they are known at work, like people know them, they know about them, they like them? This is a place where they can come to work and have social relationships and not just transactional relationships. You do the work, I pay you. That kind of a thing. Do you make them feel that way? Because we will work harder and more effectively for people we like, and we like them in direct proportion to how they make us feel. Okay? So, if you've ever had a management class before, you've seen this. This is French and Raven back in 1959. Different sources of power and influence, okay? Me as a leader trying to influence followers. Not in a drink the Kool-Aid kind of way, but I want to influence you to help you achieve your goals, realize your values, etc., okay? First 3 sources of power: reward power, coercive power, legitimate power. Reward power is this. You've got power over people or influence because you control rewards. Promotions, monetary incentives, positive performance appraisal, okay? Schedules, a good schedule, right? Coercive power is the opposite. You've got power and influence over people because you are in a position to punish. Demotions, negative performance appraisal, not a good schedule, or withhold rewards, okay? And then legitimate power is simply you've got power or influence over people because you and I both look at the org chart, you're higher on it, and we both accept it. Well, you've got this title, I only have this title. Yeah, so when you say something, I know, well, I probably better listen, okay? We get this from like anthropology and tribal communities where they sort of just accept this is the tribal elder, okay, and they've got that legitimate power, right? We see the same things in organizations, right? The second you are made a supervisor, whether you're a supervisor now or not, the second you are made one, you are handed those sources of power. That's what it is, okay? You are given that coercive reward and legitimate power in an organization the second you become a supervisor over other people, okay? Now, we want to talk about 2 other types of influence and power: expert power and referent power. Expert power is, and I suspect you know people like this, when they talk on a subject, even if someone is higher on the organizational chart, when this person speaks on a subject, everyone listens because they know they are such an expert in it. I worked with someone like this. In HR, he knew HR law so well that when he spoke on it, the higher-ups were like, okay, let's go with that, because he had expert power. In fact, an interesting example is Lamborghini. You know, the guy behind the cars? In World War II, Lamborghini was on an island off of Greece, and they were shipped manuals on how to fix the Jeeps and the tanks. Do you know what Lamborghini did? For whatever reason, he got a hold, he was sent these manuals, and he memorized them and burned them. Why? You don't send the only expert to the front lines. Okay, which is really not very patriotic, right? And you know, but he understood the significance of expert power. That, he's indispensable because he's got this expertise, right? Now the next one, referent power, is a little more tricky. Referent power is why we have celebrity endorsements. Okay, oh, Michael Jordan wears those shoes? I want to wear those shoes. Julia Roberts wears that perfume? I want to wear that perfume. It's wanting to identify or please someone because of their personality, this is a dangerous term, but their charisma. And I would add another term that I think is a little more useful to us. I would say their likability. It's identifying with them. It's someone has something you're like, yeah, I want to work for them. Now, if it's their likability, as broad and as vague and ambiguous as a term as that might be, what gives someone likability? We will work harder and more effectively for people we like, and we like them in what? Direct proportion to how they make us feel. Okay? How do you treat people? I think emotional intelligence itself, we're sort of looping here, but is a big part of referent power. It gives someone that likability. How do you make people feel? Right? Because I'm convinced that you can have power and influence over people based on that. Are you sharing a compelling vision with them? Do they know that what matters to you is their success? And that you want what's best for them, even when you have to deliver bad news, even when you have to give them constructive feedback, that you've developed such trust with them that they know that your intentions are pure, and they're like, yeah, you probably have worked for someone like this before. I hope you have, okay? Where you're like, yeah, as I describe referent power, you're like, yeah, that's Diane. Or you know what, that's Dave. That's them, okay? This is leadership. Yeah, you're handed these when you're given supervision, and leaders may have to rely on these things, but they generally rely on these things. How do you increase your expert power? Yeah, you go to the UDOT conference, and you know, whatever, right? You learning, education, certifications, whatever it is, right? You become expert in something, okay? We'll talk about how to increase our referent power here in a second. Now, let me see if I have enough time. I'm trying to influence you, okay? I'm your boss. I'm trying to get you to do your work better, more effectively, whatever, come to work on time, whatever else it might be. There are 3 general outcomes to influence, okay? The first is resistance. That is, the employee is actively, or I would say more commonly, tacitly opposed to carrying out the request. That is, I need you to do your job, and you may even say to my face, yep, sure, and then you're digging in your heels. Unfortunately, we have some employees like this. Okay? I don't think a majority, but we have some like this. I think that, unfortunately, the majority of employees reside in the next group. And that's compliance. Right? The employee is willing to carry out their job, their performance plan, and follow the rules, but they're not invested in the success of it. The employee does the bare minimum, enough to avoid punishment. I'm going to do enough where you pay me and leave me alone. Okay? I'm not bringing my whole self to this. And this employee is certainly not giving any discretionary effort. Right? What we want, of course, is commitment. The employee identifies, notice this here, the employee identifies with the purpose, the organization's purpose, and the person making the request. Think about referent power, okay? The employee is engaged and wants the request to succeed. So it's not just, yeah, I'm going to do my job so I don't get fired. It's, no, I'm on board with what we're doing here. I see the vision of what we're trying to accomplish, of the value that we add to the state of Utah, and I'm going to give everything I have to this, right? They've got to identify with that purpose and the person making the request. The person who is committed, I suspect, has a leader with referent power. So we know the evidence is clear. If I rely on the supervisory powers of legitimate and reward power, do it because I'm your boss, or do it and I'll try and get you that good schedule, there is a nil relationship to improve performance and to good performance. If I rely on coercive power, you better do this or else. There is an inverse relationship to improve performance. Performance goes down. Okay? But if I rely on expert power and referent power, I am much more likely to get commitment, and the evidence is there is a positive relationship to improved performance at the organizational and the individual level. Okay? Simply based on what I would call the 4th part of emotional intelligence, how you and I wield influence. Okay? So, how do we increase our referent power? Who's Dale Carnegie? Yeah, he's a relationships guru. He wrote a book in 1936 called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I remember growing up with this book on the bookshelf. And I remember, I think I was 10 or 11, I looked at it and I was like, how to win friends and influence people? I was like, what kind of a loser are my parents? Like, what losers? They can't win friends without a book telling them how to do it, you know? But truly, Carnegie, the Coveys and the Tony Robbins and any sort of management or leadership book dealing with relationships now owes a debt to Carnegie, because he was sort of the first to identify some really important things. Now, when Carnegie wrote his book, which has been, you know, millions and millions of copies, there's the Carnegie Institute, which still, you know, people pay a lot of money to go to. He was just anecdotal. It was just experience. But Leadership Studies, Leadership Quarterly said, let's test. Let's see if Carnegie was right. And you know what they found? Said, yeah. You got to modify a few things because they're social scientists and that kind of thing. But they said, Carnegie was right. These things matter. Now, this list is not all-inclusive. In fact, I would encourage you, if you haven't, to read the book. It's really worth it, How to Win Friends and Influence People, okay? But this is what Carnegie says. Effusive, genuine praise. What's the key word? Genuine. Not glad-handing, not politicking, but real specific. Look, if you're a leader, look consciously, proactively, look for opportunities to praise people on specific things, right? This is how we increase our referent power. Positive attitude. Why? Why does a positive attitude matter? What's the term we looked at earlier? Emotional contagion. Emotions are contagious. We tend to like to be around people that are positive, that are happy. I've got here, care enough to remember. What this means is if you've got an employee or someone that you work with and they tell you that they're really into hunting, maybe the next hunting season you'll be like, hey, did you get a tag this year? Okay, or if someone tells you they're a big Ute fan, you can be like, oh, sorry about the USC game, or, you know, that kind of a thing, or when their birthday is, or their kids' names, or, you know, their spouse's name, or whatever else it might be. Because what does that communicate to me, if you remember that stuff that I've told you? That you care, that I matter. Okay? What if you're not good at remembering that kind of stuff? Write it down. Okay? Write it down, right? That stuff matters to people. Have a sense of humor. Be self-deprecating. What does it mean to be self-deprecating? Yeah, be able to make fun of yourself. We love this when people in positions of authority and power over us can be self-deprecating, that they don't take themselves too seriously, that they recognize that they're just part of the team. Okay? And having a sense of humor doesn't mean you have to be the class clown. It means you have to have an appreciation for the humorous and the funny. Okay? But be willing, especially if you're in a position of authority, to be self-deprecating, okay? Admit when you are wrong. I think it's the same dynamic here as being self-deprecating. When the boss can say, this was my fault. You've worked for people before who won't take responsibility. You've worked for bosses before being like, why'd you guys screw this up? You're like, this was your mistake. You want to lose trust quickly? Don't admit when it's your mistake. Okay, you're going to lose trust so quickly, and you're not going to have referent power. Try to make others look good. Okay? Try to make others look good. Ryan here is helping us with our technology here. I'm guessing Ryan is very technologically skilled. Is that fair to say? Sure. Okay? Now, Ryan, let's say there's a new computer program that UDOT is adopting. And I go, I'm not getting it, Ryan, can you help me? He can take one of two approaches. In fact, Saturday Night Live used to have a skit called Nick Burns, your company's computer guy. And it was a stereotype, certainly not true of Ryan, okay, of the guy coming in being so demeaning and condescending, like, move, I'll fix this, you're such an idiot, it's so easy, that kind of thing. Or you could take the Ryan approach and come and be like, oh yeah, Dan, don't worry, this program's not really user-friendly. Don't worry, I struggled with it for a while too. You see the difference? Or, you know what, yeah, I got this one down, but remember the last program we did? That took me forever, and you got that quicker than I did. Instead of using it as an opportunity to embarrass or belittle, or, you know, try to make others look good and feel good, right? Avoid arguments, but not important conversations. We could spend a whole day on that. The reason the qualifier there is not the important conversations. Yeah, you should avoid arguments, but we have lots of people that avoid arguments at the expense of everything else. Well, I'm not going to give them feedback because I want to avoid an argument. They're so conflict averse that they never hold anybody accountable for anything or have a difficult conversation. You and I need to have those conversations, but we don't want to be argumentative about it. One way to do that is to remember object, cognition, value appraisal, emotion. And then that emotion tends to lead to action, right? So if I can understand where I can interject and have some self-control in there, or where I can manipulate variables in there, generally cognition and value appraisal, then I can go in non-combatively, right? I can be in control. I can prepare for it, as we heard earlier. And then finally, respect others' emotions. Okay? So again, what I would suggest you look, this is a brief amount of time that we've talked about this. What I would recommend to you is that you look at primal leadership, that you look at working with emotional intelligence. Look, there's more information than you'll know what to do with if you Google books or articles on emotional intelligence, and find if it resonates with you. If there are things that you look at and you say, yeah, I think that is, as we saw in the quote earlier, leadership is almost all emotional intelligence. Okay? And I'll just tell you, my experience has been, and I'm seeing this even right now in my own agency at the Department of Human Resource Management, there are people whose careers are going in opposite directions based simply on these things. In fact, the person whose career is doing this, okay, they're starting to get it back, right? They're starting to get it back, but they have done this for a long time, could not be brighter, could not have a more intellect, could not even be more of an expert in the field, but because of their lack of emotional intelligence, these things that we've talked about, they're not in a position to be a leader, okay, because of the way others around them feel and because they're not promotable, simply based on these things that we've talked about. And that's why we have it here is that it factor, that hard to define, hard to describe thing, but my experience has been that this is sort of what gives leaders that thing that says, yeah, I'm willing to follow that person. I'm willing to be a follower, not just an employee. Okay? Are there any questions or anything? Okay, thanks everybody.